I remember my grandmother's bed being so high, I had to climb onto it with the step stool.
Then she reached underneath the bed and pulled out a box I had never seen before. Inside was a little yellow dress with brown sleeves, preserved like history itself.
Some families passed down money, some passed down land. Mine passed down memories people were afraid to lose.
The room was always quiet when my grandmother opened that box. I remember climbing onto her bed, struggling to pull myself up because she kept it so high off the floor. Sunlight pushed softly through the lace curtains, and dust drifted through the air like tiny pieces of memory floating around the room. Then she would kneel down beside the bed, slowly, carefully, and from underneath it, she would pull out an old, worn box. Not jewelry, not money, not anything people would call valuable. But somehow, even as a child, I knew it mattered. I watched her hands lift the lid carefully, almost like she was opening something sacred. Inside were old photographs, papers folded with age, little pieces of family history. And one day, she unfolded a small yellow dress with brown sleeves. The room became still. No television, no rushing, no laughter, just memory. At the time, I did not fully understand what I was looking at. To me, it was simply an old dress from another time. But years later, I finally understood what the elders in our families were really doing. They were carrying more than objects. They were carrying proof that we existed. Because for many Black families, history was not protected in museums or archives. Sometimes history survived in boxes under beds, in faded photographs, in military papers, in church programs, in stories whispered carefully to children who were expected to remember. Families protected memory because memory was often the only thing nobody could fully steal. And after slavery, after migration, after segregation, after families were separated, displaced, ignored, or erased, those small keepsakes became evidence that a people had survived at all. That may be why the elders protected certain things so carefully. Not because they were expensive, but because they carried the weight of a family's existence. Those small keepsakes became evidence that a people had survived at all. That may be why the elders protected certain things so carefully, not because they were expensive, but because they carried the weight of a family's existence. And looking back now, I think many Black families understood something that history books often leave out. When a people have their names erased, their communities destroyed, their photographs burned, their land taken, their stories ignored, family becomes the last safe place where memory can still survive. That is why the old people held on to things, the dress, the papers, the photographs, the warnings, the stories. They were trying to make sure that even if the world forgot us, somebody in the family would still remember. And maybe that is why silence existed in so many Black households too. Because the same elders who protected memory were also trying to protect their children from pain. Some stories were passed down carefully. Others were buried deeply, not because the elders were ashamed, but because they knew exactly how dangerous the world could be for a Black child growing up in America. And years later, I would finally understand that lesson for myself. Because in many black households, protection did not always sound gentle. Sometimes protection sounded like warnings. Sometimes it sounded like silence. Sometimes it sounded like elders changing the subject the moment certain questions were asked. I remember asking my grandfather once about our family being connected to Native ancestry. I was young, curious, trying to understand who we were and where we came from. But the moment I asked, his expression changed. He looked at me seriously and said, "Child, you already have enough to worry about. You are a black female. That is already enough." At the time, I did not fully understand why those words carried so much weight. I only knew the room suddenly felt heavier, so I stopped asking. Years later, I realized my grandfather was not rejecting history. He was trying to protect me from it, because his generation understood something many younger people never had to think about. Identity could become dangerous. The wrong name, the wrong accusation, the wrong rumor, the wrong place, the wrong skin color could change the direction of your entire life in America. So many elders learned to survive by teaching caution, not because they lacked pride, but because survival often required understanding exactly how the world saw you. That kind of protection shaped entire generations of black families. Some parents taught children how to speak carefully around white authority. Some taught them never to challenge certain systems openly. Some taught them to leave the South and never look back. And some protected their children by burying painful pieces of the family story so deeply that later generations barely knew those stories existed at all. Some of those buried stories disappeared quietly over time, not because they lacked importance, but because many elders believed silence could protect the next generation better than painful truth could. Some families stopped speaking certain names. Some stopped discussing where they came from. Some refused to talk about violence, lynchings, land theft, or humiliation they had witnessed with their own eyes. And some children learned very early not to ask too many questions, because there were memories the older generation carried that were simply too heavy to place onto young shoulders. That silence shaped entire generations of black families across America. Many children grew up sensing pain in the room without fully understanding its source. They noticed the way grandparents became quiet when certain towns were mentioned. They noticed the warnings: be careful, don't stay out late, don't argue with police, don't trust certain people, keep your head down, work twice as hard, protect the family. Those lessons were not random. They were survival instructions passed down through generations who had already seen what America could do to black families when protection failed. And even after slavery officially ended, black families still understood that safety could disappear quickly. A job could disappear, a home could disappear, a neighborhood could disappear, a life could disappear. So family became more than love. Family became strategy. Family became shelter. Family became information. Family became protection. And in many ways, black families were forced to become their own First Nation long before America fully treated them as citizens. That may be why elders guarded family memory so carefully. Because once history disappears, people become easier to erase. And maybe that is why so many black families fought so hard to hold on to one another. Even during the hardest years of migration, segregation, poverty, and separation. And maybe that is why so many black families fought so hard to hold on to one another, even during the hardest years of migration, segregation, poverty, and separation. Because for generations, family was often the only institution black people could fully trust. Laws changed, politicians changed, promises changed, but families were expected to survive anyway. Grandmothers stretched meals to feed extra mouths. Grandfathers carried impossible pressure silently. Aunts helped raise children that were not biologically their own. Church mothers corrected children all over the neighborhood, like the entire community belonged to them. People shared what little they had because survival was rarely individual. It was collective. And even during the years when black families were locked out of opportunities, denied loans, pushed into overcrowded neighborhoods, or separated by migration and prison systems, many families still found ways to create stability inside instability. That strength did not come from comfort. It came from necessity. Because generations of black families understood something painful very early. If the family falls apart, everything else becomes easier to take. That is why elders work so hard to protect children emotionally, spiritually, and physically, even when they themselves were exhausted. Some parents hid fear behind discipline. Some hid trauma behind silence. Some hid heartbreak behind faith. And many children grew up without fully realizing how much pressure the older generation was carrying every single day just to keep the family together. Looking back now, I think many elders were trying to do two things at the same time. They were trying to help children survive the world as it existed, while also trying to protect their ability to dream beyond it. Because despite everything black families faced in America, they still kept building families, still kept loving children, still kept gathering for holidays, still kept singing in churches, still kept believing tomorrow could somehow become better than yesterday. Millions of black families across America carried rules that were rarely written down anywhere. Children learned them simply by growing up inside the household. Some rules were spoken directly. Others were understood through tone, silence, and observation. Never be caught in the wrong place after dark. Always know how white authority sees you. Be careful what you say around strangers. Do not bring unnecessary attention to yourself. Protect the family at all costs. And perhaps one of the most painful lessons of all, many black children learned very early that survival sometimes required becoming smaller than they truly were. Smaller in public, smaller in classrooms, smaller in workplaces, smaller around power, because generations before them had already witnessed what could happen to black people who were seen as too proud, too outspoken, or too successful. That pressure shaped the emotional life of countless black families for generations. It shaped how parents disciplined children. It shaped how elders spoke about danger. It shaped migration decisions. It even shaped which dreams families believed were safe enough to pursue openly. And yet, despite carrying all of those pressures, black families still somehow created beauty. People still gathered on porches during summer evenings. Children still laughed in neighborhoods built under impossible conditions. Families still passed down recipes, songs, church traditions, photographs, and stories that connected one generation to another. That resilience may be one of the most extraordinary parts of Black American history, because even while living inside systems designed to limit them, Black families continued building lives filled with love, memory, faith, humor, and hope. That is something history books do not always explain well. Too often, Black history is only shown through suffering, but survival itself required much more than pain. It required imagination. It required community. It required families creating joy in places where joy was never supposed to fully survive. People planted gardens in poor soil. Mothers decorated small apartments like palaces. Grandfathers sat on porches telling stories that made children laugh until dark. Churches filled with music powerful enough to carry people through another difficult week. Even in neighborhoods struggling under poverty and segregation, life still existed there. Birthday parties still happened. School pictures still mattered. Families still argued at dinner tables. Children still played games in the streets until the porch lights came on. That humanity matters. Because one of the greatest distortions in American history is the idea that Black families only existed inside struggle. The truth is, Black families were also building culture, building traditions, building emotional worlds, building identity. And often they were doing it while carrying enormous pressure privately that children could not yet see. I think about that now when I remember the elders in my own family. At the time, I only saw grandparents. I only saw rules, warnings, church clothes, family gatherings, old stories, boxes under beds. But now I realize I was looking at generations of people who had already survived things they rarely spoke about openly. People who carried migration inside them, segregation inside them, fear inside them, disappointment inside them, and yet somehow they still found ways to keep loving people anyway. That may be one of the most powerful forms of resistance Black families ever created. The refusal to stop loving each other in a world that constantly tried to break families apart. Because for generations, Black families understood something very clearly. The world outside the home could become cold very quickly. A child could leave the house smiling in the morning and come home carrying humiliation by evening. A father could work hard his entire life and still be denied dignity. A mother could sacrifice everything she had just to keep food on the table, and children emotionally protected from pressures they were too young to fully understand. And yet, many elders still tried to create small islands of safety inside the family. That safety might look simple to outsiders now. A Sunday dinner, a church gathering, a grandmother humming in the kitchen, children running through crowded neighborhoods while adults watched from porches. But those ordinary moments carried enormous meaning, because in a society that often denied Black people stability, family became the place where people tried to rebuild their humanity over and over again. That is why family stories mattered so much. That is why photographs mattered. That is why reunions mattered. That is why people kept names alive long after loved ones passed away. The family was doing more than remembering. The family was resisting disappearance, And maybe that is what I understand now when I think back to those quiet moments beside my grandmother's bed. The yellow dress was never just a dress. The photographs were never just photographs. The warnings were never just warnings. Those were pieces of survival being handed carefully from one generation to another, hoping somebody young enough would still carry the memory forward after they were gone. The warnings were never just warnings either. Many Black families understood something that younger generations sometimes could not fully see at the time. Danger did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes danger arrived through a change in laws, a change in neighborhoods, a look from the wrong person, a job suddenly disappearing, a bank refusing a loan, a school refusing opportunity, a police officer asking too many questions, a family learning when to speak, and when silence might keep somebody alive. So protection became deeply woven into everyday Black family life. Not only physical protection, emotional protection, historical protection, cultural protection. That is why so many elders guarded old papers, military records, photographs, family Bibles, recipes, funeral programs, and names passed down through generations. Because too many people had already watched history disappear once before. And over time, I began realizing something I could not fully understand as a child sitting beside my grandmother's high bed. Many Black families became small nations inside America itself. They built systems of care when larger systems failed them. Grandmothers became historians. Grandfathers became protectors. Churches became emotional shelters. Neighbors became witnesses to one another's survival. And if some of this feels familiar to your own family story, I hope you will stay connected to this channel and this series, because many of these memories survived only because ordinary people refused to let them disappear. And maybe that is why so many Black families became experts at reading things that were never spoken aloud. A pause in someone's voice, a warning look across the dinner table, a curtain moving late at night, the sudden instruction to come inside before the streetlights came on, the understanding that certain conversations should never happen in front of strangers. Children often believed these behaviors were simply strict rules. But many of those rules were actually survival lessons passed carefully from one generation to another. Because Black families had already lived through periods when saying the wrong thing, trusting the wrong person, or being visible in the wrong place could change the course of an entire family. And even though younger generations did not always understand the fear underneath those lessons, the elders carried those memories inside them every day. I think about that now when I remember my grandfather becoming upset after I asked questions about our family history. At the time, I thought he was shutting the conversation down. Now I realize he may have been trying to protect me from burdens he already understood far too well. Because many Black elders were carrying migration inside them, Jim Crow inside them, humiliation inside them, disappointment inside them, loss inside them. And yet somehow, they still built families filled with love, humor, music, church traditions, photographs, reunions, recipes, and hope. That may be one of the most extraordinary forms of resistance Black families ever created. The refusal to stop loving each other in a society that repeatedly tried to break Black families apart, that repeatedly tried to separate them from their history, their land, their opportunities, and sometimes even from one another. because slavery did not simply attack labor, it attacked connection. Jim Crow did not simply create segregation, it created fear. And even after laws began changing, many black families still understood that survival often depended on staying emotionally connected to each other in ways the outside world could not easily destroy. That is why family reunions became sacred, why church gatherings mattered, why old photographs stayed important, why people continued repeating the names of grandparents, cousins, aunties, and ancestors long after they were gone. The family was doing more than remembering. The family was rebuilding continuity. Every recipe passed down was a form of continuity. Every funeral program saved in a drawer was continuity. Every story repeated at the kitchen table was continuity. Because when a people have spent generations watching history erased, memory itself becomes a form of protection. And maybe that is what I understand now when I think back to that yellow dress sitting quietly inside my grandmother's room. She was not simply saving old things. She was protecting evidence that her family existed, that their lives mattered, that their memories deserved to survive. And maybe that is what so many black families were truly fighting for all along. Not simply the right to survive physically, but the right to remain fully human, fully remembered, and fully connected to one another across generations. Because for many black families, survival was never only about making it through one difficult moment. It was about making sure the next generation still knew who they were after the struggle ended. That meant protecting names, protecting stories, protecting dignity. Even when the world outside the home tried to reduce black people to stereotypes, statistics, or silence, families continued creating spaces where children could still feel loved, valued, and seen as fully human. And sometimes those spaces were very small. A grandmother's bedroom, a crowded kitchen, a front porch during summer evenings, a church pew, a family picnic, a box hidden beneath a high bed. But inside those spaces, something powerful was happening. Black families were building emotional nations strong enough to survive generations of pressure. Not perfect families, not fearless families, not families untouched by pain, but families determined to keep carrying something forward anyway. And the older I get, the more I realize how much strength it must have taken for earlier generations to continue loving people while carrying so much unspoken grief inside them. Some had survived segregation, some had survived migration north, some had survived poverty, some had survived humiliation they never fully discussed aloud. Yet many still woke up every morning trying to build a better future for children and grandchildren they hoped might one day live with less fear than they did. Maybe that is why so many elders protected family memories so carefully. Because memory was proof that despite everything America tried to erase, the family was still here. Still here despite slavery. Still here despite segregation. Still here despite migration, redlining, violence, humiliation, and silence. And maybe that is why so many black elders held on to ordinary things with such extraordinary care. Old military papers, birth certificates, church fans, cookbooks stained with fingerprints, black and white photographs folded at the corners, funeral programs saved inside dresser drawers, quilts sewn from pieces of older lives. To younger people, some of those objects may have looked small or unimportant, but to many elders, they were evidence that somebody had lived, evidence that somebody had struggled, evidence that somebody had loved deeply enough to leave traces behind for the next generation to find. I understand that differently now than I did as a child. Back then, I only saw old people saving old things. Now I realize many black families were trying to preserve continuity in a country that repeatedly disrupted black life. Families were separated during slavery. Communities were uprooted during migration. Neighborhoods were destroyed through highways, urban renewal, rising rents, and displacement. So memory became one of the few forms of ownership many people could still control. And maybe that is why certain stories were repeated over and over again at family gatherings. Not because elders forgot they had already told them, but because they were trying to make sure the stories survived long enough to reach somebody willing to carry them forward. Because once memory disappears, entire worlds can disappear with it. Entire communities can disappear with it. Entire family connections can disappear with it. Entire generations can begin growing up without fully understanding what earlier generations survived just to keep the family standing. And maybe that is part of what makes these memories so emotional now when I think about them as an adult. Because I realize many of the elders I grew up around were carrying histories they rarely had the luxury to fully process themselves. Some had spent years trying to survive instead of heal, trying to provide instead of explain, trying to protect children from burdens they believed young people should not have to carry too early. So sometimes love sounded like silence. Sometimes love sounded like strictness. Sometimes love sounded like warnings children did not fully understand until decades later. And the truth is, many black families became experts at emotional endurance, not because they wanted to suffer, but because history kept demanding strength from people who were rarely given enough room to rest. Still, somehow, many continued creating beauty anyway. Music, laughter, Sunday dinners, school graduations, family reunions, front porch conversations during summer evenings, tiny moments of joy protected inside difficult lives. That is something history books do not always explain very well. Black families were not only surviving oppression.
Pa, tell me about our Native American family history.
Child, you already have enough to worry about being Negro girl in this country. Just worry about that.
Because many black elders understood dangers younger generations had not yet learned to recognize. And sometimes protecting children did not always look gentle. Sometimes protection sounded firm. Sometimes protection sounded fearful. Sometimes protection meant teaching children how to survive realities adults wished did not exist. But underneath all of it was something deeper, a determination to keep the next generation alive long enough to dream beyond the limitations earlier generations had endured. That is love too. And maybe that is why this fourth commandment became so important after slavery: build and protect strong families. Because for many black Americans, family became the first line of emotional defense against a society that could change without warning. I think about that now whenever I remember the conversation I once had with my grandfather. I had asked him questions about our Native American family connection. At the time, I was simply curious. I wanted to understand where we came from, but I still remember the way his face changed before he answered me. Child, you already have enough to worry about being black and female in this country. Just worry about that. The room felt heavier after he said it. At the time, I did not fully understand why those words carried so much emotion underneath them. Now I think I do. He was not trying to erase part of our history. He was trying to prepare me for the reality he believed America would force me to face first. And maybe that moment explains something larger about many black families across generations. Love often became tied to preparation. Preparation became tied to survival. And survival became tied to protecting the next generation from dangers elders already understood too well. That is why so many black families developed ways of speaking that younger generations sometimes misunderstood. Warnings became a form of love. Strictness became a form of love. Silence sometimes became a form of love, too. Because many elders had lived through years when saying the wrong thing, trusting the wrong person, walking into the wrong neighborhood, or challenging the wrong system could change a life forever. Some had survived segregation. Some had survived racial violence. Some had survived migration north, carrying little more than determination and memory. And many of them understood something deeply painful. Children could not always be protected from the world itself, but maybe they could be prepared for it. Looking back now, I realize many black families were carrying invisible survival manuals inside their homes. Manuals passed down without books, passed down through stories, through warnings, through church conversations, through careful looks exchanged across dinner tables, through grandparents lowering their voices when certain subjects came up, through parents teaching children how to act around authority long before those children understood why. And sometimes those lessons felt confusing to younger generations growing up in different times. Because children often experience protection differently than adults giving it. A child may hear fear, but the elder may be trying to prevent pain. And underneath so much of it was a quiet prayer shared across generations. Please survive long enough to build a life larger than the one we inherited. Maybe that is part of what commandment number 4 truly meant. Thou shalt build and protect strong families, for the family is your first nation. Because for many black Americans, family became more than relatives connected by blood. Family became protection. Family became information. Family became emotional shelter in a society that often offered very little safety outside the front door. Inside black homes, people shared survival knowledge that could not always be trusted to schools, laws, businesses, or institutions. Grandmothers preserved memory. Grandfathers passed down warnings. Parents carried responsibilities heavy enough to shape entire generations. Church mothers watched over children that were not biologically theirs. Neighbors corrected children like extended relatives because community survival often depended on everybody paying attention to everybody else. And even when families struggled, even when poverty, migration, segregation, addiction, discrimination, or violence placed enormous pressure on black households, many families still fought desperately to protect love itself from disappearing. That fight mattered more than many people realize, because slavery had already attempted to destroy black family structures once before. Children sold away, parents separated, marriages ignored by law, entire bloodlines fractured for profit. So after emancipation, protecting family became more than emotional. It became political. It became cultural. It became spiritual. And in many ways, it became one of the most important forms of resistance Black Americans possessed. Because a people who can keep their families connected can also preserve memory. They can preserve language. They can preserve faith. They can preserve values, traditions, survival strategies, and dreams powerful enough to outlive the systems trying to destroy them. That is part of why Black churches became so important, why family reunions became sacred, why old photographs were protected so carefully, why recipes, songs, military papers, obituaries, funeral programs, and handwritten Bible records carried such deep meaning inside many Black households. Those items were never just objects. They were proof. Proof that people had lived. Proof that families survived. Proof that history existed even when official institutions ignored it. I think about my grandmother sometimes keeping memories stored carefully under that tall bed of hers. Boxes filled with family pieces most outsiders might not have understood the importance of, but older generations understood. Because when people have spent generations watching history erased, preserving memory itself becomes an act of protection. And maybe that is why so many Black elders guarded family stories so fiercely. Not because they were trapped in the past, but because they understood how easily the past could disappear if nobody protected it. That yellow dress my grandmother showed me was not valuable because of money. It was valuable because somebody cared enough to save it, to carry it forward, to remember. And the older I get, the more I realize that many Black families became guardians of memory in a country that often refused to protect Black history the same way. So much of our history survived because ordinary people protected it quietly inside their homes, not museums, not government buildings, not textbooks, families, grandmothers saving photographs in boxes, mothers keeping newspaper clippings folded carefully inside Bibles, veterans protecting military papers inside drawers for decades, elders repeating names, towns, birthplaces, and family connections so younger generations would not lose themselves completely. And sometimes those memories were all families had left after migration, discrimination, displacement, or poverty forced people to leave parts of their lives behind. That is why so many Black households became places where history and survival lived side by side. Joy and pain lived side by side. Laughter and grief lived side by side. Because many families were carrying generations of unfinished healing while still trying to create normal childhoods for the people growing up behind them. Looking back now, I think many Black children grew up surrounded by invisible acts of protection they did not fully recognize at the time. Protection in the way elders watched people carefully. Protection in the way parents taught children how to behave in public. Protection in the way family members stepped in to help raise children when life became difficult. Because in many Black communities, parenting often extended far beyond just two people inside one household. Grandmothers helped raise grandchildren. Aunts became second mothers. Older cousins became protectors. Church mothers corrected children like they belonged to them too. Neighbors watched over entire blocks because many people understood something deeply important. A child who survives and grows strong can eventually help carry the entire community forward. And maybe that collective way of protecting one another became necessary because Black families had already survived generations of instability forced upon them from the outside. Slavery separated families. Jim Crow restricted opportunity. Migration scattered relatives across different states. Mass incarceration would later fracture households again. Economic inequality placed enormous stress on parents trying to provide stability while fighting systems never designed to make survival easy. And yet somehow, many Black families continued building love in the middle of all of it. Birthday parties still happened. Sunday dinners still happened. Church clothes were still ironed carefully. Children were still reminded to say, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." People still laughed on porches during summer evenings. Music still filled kitchens while somebody cooked. And that matters, because survival alone was never the full goal. Black families were also trying to preserve dignity, trying to preserve humanity, trying to preserve joy. That may be one of the most overlooked parts of Black history. People often focus only on suffering, but many Black families were doing something far more complicated than simply surviving oppression. They were building lives worth living despite it. And perhaps that is what commandment number 4 was truly protecting all along. Not just bloodlines, not just households, but the emotional, spiritual, and cultural foundation necessary for future generations to believe they deserved a future at all. Because hope does not survive automatically. Hope has to be protected, fed, encouraged, passed down carefully from one generation to the next. And many Black families somehow found ways to pass hope forward, even during periods when the country itself often offered very little reason for optimism. Parents still told children they could become something greater. Grandparents still believed education mattered. Churches still preached faith in tomorrow. Families still gathered for holidays, graduations, reunions, baptisms, and funerals, because staying connected mattered. Even in difficult times, people still tried to remind one another, your life has value, your future matters. Do not give up on yourself. And maybe that is why so many memories from Black families carry both pain and warmth at the same time. Because survival alone was never enough. People also wanted joy, laughter, romance, celebration, beauty, music, peace. The simple right to wake up and live without fear, constantly standing in the room beside them. That too was part of freedom, not simply the removal of chains, but the ability to build a meaningful life afterward, the ability to rest without terror, to love openly, to raise children with dignity, to grow old surrounded by family instead of separation, to believe your memories, your culture, your voice, and your existence mattered in a country that had once legally denied all of it. And maybe that is why black families fought so hard to protect even the smallest pieces of normal life. Because normalcy itself had once been denied. A safe home mattered. A family photograph mattered. A wedding mattered. A graduation mattered. A child coming home safely mattered. These things may sound ordinary to some people, but for many black families across American history, ordinary life itself became extraordinary because of how hard people had to fight to hold on to it. That is why so many elders carried such fierce determination when it came to family. They understood how fragile stability could become once violence, racism, poverty, or discrimination entered a household. And they also understood how quickly generations could lose connection to each other when survival became difficult. So people protected what they could. They protected names, stories, recipes, land when possible, church communities, military records, old letters, baby dresses stored carefully in boxes beneath beds, tiny reminders that somebody had lived, loved, struggled, and endured long enough to leave evidence behind for the next generation. And maybe that is what I understand differently now when I think back on my grandfather's warning and my grandmother's yellow dress. One was trying to prepare me for danger. The other was trying to preserve memory. But both were acts of protection, both were acts of love, and both were part of a much larger story carried quietly through generations of black families after emancipation. A story rarely explained fully in textbooks, because so much of black history did not survive through institutions first. It survived through people. Through families willing to carry emotional weight from one generation into the next. Sometimes that weight looked like discipline. Sometimes it looked like sacrifice. Sometimes it looked like silence. And sometimes it looked like elders trying to protect children from realities they prayed those children would never have to experience personally. Looking back now, I realize many of the adults around me were carrying fears they almost never explained openly. Fears connected to race, to safety, to housing, to money, to opportunity, to simply trying to survive with dignity in a country where stability for black families could disappear quickly. And yet, despite those fears, people still kept building families anyway. Still falling in love, still having children, still gathering around dinner tables, still believing the next generation might somehow live better than the one before. That kind of hope should never be underestimated, because hope carried through oppression is not weakness. It is resistance. It is faith refusing to die, preserving tenderness in places shaped by struggle, preserving enough hope that future generations could imagine lives larger than fear. And maybe that quiet determination became one of the most powerful forms of resistance black families ever created after emancipation. Not resistance built only through protest, but resistance built through love, through memory, through protection, through people refusing to let one another disappear. And maybe that is why so many black families fought so hard to hold themselves together, even when the world around them constantly applied pressure to pull them apart. Because somewhere deep down, many elders understood something history books often fail to explain clearly enough. If the family survived, then the future still had a chance. And maybe that is what I understand differently now. when I think back on that yellow dress. At the time, I thought my grandmother was simply showing me an old piece of family history, a child's dress, a keepsake, something saved in a box beneath a bed. But now I think it was something more. Because families who had survived slavery, segregation, migration, discrimination, and disappointment often became guardians of things the rest of the world considered unimportant. A dress, a photograph, a Bible, a military paper, a recipe card, a letter folded so many times the edges began to disappear. To someone else, those objects might have looked ordinary, but inside Black families, those objects often carried entire generations. They carried names, stories, warnings, dreams, proof that people had lived, struggled, loved, and endured. And perhaps that is why so many elders protected those memories so fiercely, because they understood something history books often overlook. When a people are denied control over so much of their future, preserving memory becomes an act of resistance. Every photograph saved, every family story repeated, every treasured object passed from one generation to the next became a declaration. We were here, we mattered, we belonged. And maybe that was part of the real work families were doing all along. Not simply surviving, not simply raising children, but protecting enough memory, enough identity, and enough hope that future generations would know who they were long after the people who carried those memories were gone. And maybe that is the question I understand differently now. What were they trying to give the children? Why save the dress? Why save the photographs? Why save the family Bible? Why repeat the same stories over and over again? Why sit children down and tell them about people they had never met? Why protect memories so carefully? Perhaps because the elders understood something the children could not yet see. Memory was preparation. Those stories were never just stories. They were lessons, warnings, instructions, maps. The people who had survived slavery, segregation, migration, violence, and discrimination knew they would not live forever. They knew there would come a day when younger generations would have to face challenges of their own. And when that day arrived, they wanted their children to carry something stronger than fear. They wanted them to carry understanding, because a child who knows where they come from stands differently in the world. A child who knows what their grandparents endured understands struggle differently. A child who knows the sacrifices that built their family begins to see opportunity differently. Perhaps that is why so many Black families became unofficial schools long before children ever entered a classroom. Lessons happened around kitchen tables. Lessons happened on front porches. Lessons happened in churches. Lessons happened during long car rides and family reunions. History was being taught everywhere. Not because anyone expected those children to become historians, but because identity had become part of survival. And maybe that is the question I understand differently now. What were they trying to give the children? Why save the dress? Why save the photographs? Why save the family Bible? Why repeat the same stories over and over again? Why sit children down and tell them about people they had never met? Why protect memories so carefully? Perhaps because the elders understood something the children could not yet see. Memory was preparation. Those stories were never just stories. They were lessons, warnings, instructions, maps. The people who had survived slavery, segregation, migration, violence, and discrimination knew they would not live forever. They knew there would come a day when younger generations would have to face challenges of their own. And when that day arrived, they wanted their children to carry something stronger than fear. They wanted them to carry understanding, because a child who knows where they come from stands differently in the world. A child who knows what their grandparents endured understands struggle differently. A child who knows the sacrifices that built their family begins to see opportunity differently. Perhaps that is why so many black families became unofficial schools long before children ever entered a classroom. Lessons happened around kitchen tables. Lessons happened on front porches. Lessons happened in churches. Lessons happened during long car rides and family reunions. History was being taught everywhere. Not because anyone expected those children to become historians, but because identity had become part of survival.
Thou shalt build schools, honor teachers, and turn every home and church into a classroom.
That story becomes our next commandment. Commandment number 5. Thou shalt build schools, honor teachers, and turn every home and church into a classroom. Because after families protected the future, black communities understood something else. Freedom could not survive without education. And across America, they began building schools, supporting teachers, and turning homes, churches, and entire communities into places of learning. That story begins next time.